Hello, this is Matt on the Moon Lambo channel, and this is definitely an interesting topic for conversation. I didn't expect to hear this from the President of the United States, Donald Trump. He's talking about the idea of charging a tax on remittances specifically that are heading into Mexico for the purpose of paying to build a wall. A wall along the border. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the concept of this, endless political debate. And so now I want to be clear, since this is coming up thanks to something that President Donald Trump has stated. This is not a political channel. It's not a religious channel. I'm not going to go into politics, so don't worry. I have no interest in alienating half of the audience, because about half are on both sides politically, whether it's left or right, just generally speaking. And so I'm not going to be delving into anything about like the wall, this or that, or should it be there. Don't worry. I am going to talk about the implications of like what would this mean for RippleNet and on-demand liquidity, because unquestionably, if this occurred, if there were this new tax, there would be an impact. I think that's pretty undeniable here. So don't worry. I'm trying not to trigger anybody with anything I say in this video. Don't worry. I'm not going to. I don't do politics here. But, so anyway, it was Mr. B XRP, my fellow XRP YouTuber, who shared this clip of President Donald Trump speaking here and wrote, moments ago, an interesting statement about potentially using remittance as a tax source. And there's a quote, maybe we are going to do something with remittance. And of course, that was again in reference to this. So I ended up responding. I'm going to share with you a thread that resulted. But before we go any further here, if you would please ever so delicately tap the like button, I would definitely appreciate the support. And also, if you are a fan of critical thinking, think like thoughtfully just going through, premises leading to a logical conclusion, then hopefully you like this. And if so, go ahead and subscribe to the Moon Lambo channel. I promise there are worse ways to spend your time. And so in seeing this video clip, which I'm not going to play, it's like 30 seconds long. That's the only part that matters. Like, as far as funding the wall, this or that. And again, not getting into the rightness or wrongness of that. I just responded because what this means is you're talking about a tax. So take the political crap out of it to the extent that's possible, because I don't want to really dig into that. Just talk about the implication here, which would be a higher cost for those sending remittances. And so obviously that's friction, right? And that's how I took it. And so I just wrote this little like lighthearted response to Mr. BXRP. I wrote, yay, let's add friction to remittances into Mexico, and I had a little laughy face, and that was that. I didn't think it was going to be a controversial opinion. It turns out that's not the case, though. And so I want to be clear, too, when we're going through this stuff, I love diversity of thought, I really do, and so there are a couple members of the XRP community that have a different opinion than mine, and that's cool. And so I've said this in the past, but I want to be super clear that if I have an opinion that's different than your own, that is not an attack on you. I just happen to believe something different. And I trust that based on what I've read here in this Twitter thread, that they're just trying to get to the truth and believe something that's true, just like I am. And so if we walk away after logically thinking through this to the best of our abilities and we still have different opinions, that's fine. I just want to be able to, I want it to be okay to have opposing views without people getting triggered and stuff. So I just want to preface that, because sometimes people do feel attacked if you share an opinion that's different than their own, especially if it's something that is of critical importance to them or their identity and stuff. So I just want to be clear, that's not what I'm doing here. Like, to me, it's just genuinely fun to think through this stuff, and it's totally cool if you think I'm wrong. Not a problem at all. And so at XRP is Data responded to my tweet and wrote, that's asinine. It is zero friction. That is why you can bet your ass this is not a false alarm. What we've been studying for 3 years is happening. It's not happening according to expectation, but it is happening. And so I want to be clear, after I read that, I could see that this individual had a different opinion than mine. I literally did not know what was trying to be communicated, though. And so I responded, I don't understand your tweet. And I literally meant that. I wasn't trying to be like rude or sarcastic or something. I literally still don't understand it. Then I wrote, you don't see the act of increasing the cost of remittances via taxes adding friction to the whole process? And so then somebody else jumped in named Ryan here at Crypto Logics, who wrote, usually agree with you, Lambo, actually, but decreasing operating costs using XRP will still allow the United States to tax them and cut costs dramatically. And to code taking a cut, I feel wouldn't slow down the ledger. So there's a lot to unpack here. Consider this. What do taxes ultimately do? And I understand, and this is, again, I don't think this is particularly political. It's more like economics is what I'm about to cover here, so please don't get triggered. So basically, the more you tax of something, the less of that action you're going to get. And I can illustrate this pretty simply for you. Let's say that you go to buy a potato, and I'm going to make up an absurd price. Let's just say the potato already costs a ton. It doesn't matter. I was going to say $5. I could say $1. Okay, let's say $1. Okay, let's just say a potato costs $1 for an easy note. Let's say that there's a 500% tax on that, making the potato now effectively, the tax would be $5. So $6 for a potato, $1 for the potato, and then at 500% tax. That's an expensive potato, right? Now, if that's not the case, that's an absurd example, but it's easier to illustrate what's going on using absurdity like this. Now, if every potato, which I think costs less than $1, it's been a while since I bought a spud, but I'm just saying, if every potato were taxed to that degree, would fewer potatoes be sold? The answer is yes, right? And if your answer was no, okay, then let's just up it. Let's just say that there was 1,000% tax. So now you got $10 tax on a $1 potato. Would fewer people buy potatoes? And if your answer is still no, okay, what if we have a 10,000% tax? At some point, you're going to have to logically think through this and acknowledge the more you tax something, the less of that activity you're going to get. That's just a simple this is not even something that's controversial. It's just in economics. The more you tax of something, the less you get of that activity, right? That's it. And so when you're talking about introducing a new tax to remittances here, which, by the way, I had to do some research. This is actually really fun to look through, and I hope I looked through it exhaustively enough. I didn't spend a crazy amount of time, but once this came up, I was like, wait a minute, are there any taxes in the United States right now for remittances? And from what I found, and I hope this is true, if anybody has any different data, let me know, because I'm here to learn. I don't pretend to know everything, but from what I found, is there's one out of the 50 states of the United States, it's Oklahoma, and they charge a state tax for remittances, for international remittances. And I forget the figure was. It wasn't that big anyway. But there's no other state does, and there is no federal tax on remittances, right? And so, just again, if you have 0% tax versus pick any other number, you're going to encourage less of that activity. That would be friction. What we are talking about there fundamentally is frictionless. And so when you're thinking about the way money moves around the planet, what are the main pain points that we're talking about? Well, obviously, there are a number of them. Let me just name a few. Speed. Speed is awful. That's why Ripple is working towards real-time remittances. Right? And effectively, they get pretty darn close. Now, XRP Ledger closes in 3 to 5 seconds. That's about as real time as it gets these days. That's amazing. And then beyond that, however long it takes, it kind of depends on the local rails. You've got ACH here in the United States, and then whatever local clearing they have, and whatever the destination region is, it's going to vary. So, maybe it'll be a few minutes or whatever. If you include the whole transaction, if somebody's using RippleNet and on-demand liquidity specifically there. So that's a pain point right there. You're talking about the speed. You're talking about uncertainty, unidirectional messaging is historically what we've seen with Swift, whereas with RippleNet, you do have a bidirectional communication. So even if something went wrong, you're going to know immediately if something went wrong with the transaction. And then you're also talking about price, because you're pricing people out of the more expensive something is, the more you're pricing individuals out of utilizing whatever product or services that's getting whatever it is. In this case, we're talking about remittances. So it's a service, not a product, obviously. So, but the more it costs, the more you're pricing people out of it. That should be fundamentally easy to understand, right? And so, think about this. And this is one of the things that I've talked about in just like praising Ripple. Like, they are a force for good. This is one of the coolest things, because the people that are sending money from the United States to Mexico, these are some of the people that really need these savings the most, right? And so Ripple's a force for good in that sense, because typically the remittances, like the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit that Ripple's going after, the corridors, whether it's Mexico or the Philippines or whatever, these are the corridors where the people utilizing remittances through them, they're not wealthy. In fact, they're typically quite poor. They're typically not wealthy at all. And so it's not that the remittance companies are evil. It's a matter of fact that when you're running a business, there's a floor to what it costs in running a business. And I can speak personally. I'm a business owner, have been for over a decade. There's a floor to how cheap you can make things. You have to have a certain amount of margin, or else if you're a remittance company, you can't even provide the service. So it's not the case that the remittance companies are evil. It's just that they're inefficient and bloated, and they use a lot of human labor historically. And that's where the problem comes in. And so what you're talking about here is cutting all of that bloatedness out of it. You're talking about all the fees associated with no-stro accounts. That's gone. You're talking about all the layers of middle management throughout the chain of bilateral banking relationships. You're talking about cutting all of that out. Those are a couple of the biggest things here, And so again, there's a floor to how much things cost. And if you want to be competitive, you have to compete within that realm, right? Or else you're going to go out of business. That's just how it works with the invisible hand. You guys familiar with supply and demand, perhaps? Yes. And so when you're talking about the fact that utilizing XRP as a bridge currency is going to bring the expense of all of this down, sure, that's good. But then you're talking about adding something to it that isn't necessarily necessary. And I would love to hear the argument. Now, consider this, too, on top of this. This is just a fun side note. Over the last several years, the United States federal government has taken in more actual dollars in terms of tax revenue than it has in the history of the country. Ever. Adjust for inflation, even. Ever. That's where they are. Still have an outrageous spending problem. So they're taking this money. It's like, I would like you to, if you want to, explain to me why they deserve to take an additional tax revenue on the poorest people on the planet. Some of the poorest people on the planet who are sending money back to their families in Mexico. You want to explain to me why those poor people should be taxed to send that to the federal government so that the federal government can responsibly spend the money? I'm sorry, guys. They're taking in record amounts of money from taxpayers, and they're running a massive deficit, even before the crazy money printing thanks to COVID. And you want to tell me that they're the best stewards to take these tax dollars, because who's going to pay it ultimately? It's going to be the poorest. It's going to be the people that need to send the remittances. So whether you're talking about 1% or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, that's why I was illustrating earlier. It doesn't matter if you add any expense that's adding friction in terms of the amount of volume. Like with how expensive things are right now, it's absolutely impacting how frequently people are making transactions, which is why David Schwartz, Ripple CTO, co-creator of the XRP Ledger, has talked about Javon's paradox. And I don't really want to get into the example of that, but it's the idea of if you think about here's how it applies to RippleNet. If you bring costs down, you're going to encourage more of that type of activity. And think about micropayments, which were not possible prior to the proliferation of this type of technology, right? And so whether it's a small percentage or a big percentage, it's going to add friction in terms of the cost. It's going to affect people's behavior, some very poor people's behavior. It is. And that's why I was illustrating earlier, the greater the tax, the more obvious it is that it's making a change. And so even if it's a small tax, even if it's hard to measure the change, it's still there. You are affecting people because they're looking at how much they're spending. You think people, especially if they're poor, they're not looking at their bottom line? My gosh, it's going to affect how much they can spend, how much they can buy, all of this. And that's going to have an effect on the flows of remittances. And so again, when Ryan here wrote, decreasing operating costs using XRP will still allow the U.S. to tax them and cut costs dramatically. Well, okay. So let's say that there were a tax on the system, the existing SWIFT system, and then Ripple comes in and makes things more efficient, but there's still a tax, and now it's just on RippleNet. What the hell's the difference? You still got this extra friction from tax. Like, why do we need to add that? Okay, and I'm willing to hear an argument if anybody wants to articulate one. But then you also wrote, and to code taking a cut, I feel wouldn't slow down the ledger. And I read that like 5 times before I think I got what he meant. I think he's talking about changing the code of the XRP ledger. And if that's the case, the answer is almost certainly no. First of all, when you're talking about taxing on the federal level, that would be the federal government getting a tax from remittance companies, not anything specific to XRP Ledger. If it were the XRP Ledger, I don't even know what the hell that would look like, because you're talking about, first of all, you need 80% plus of, or 80% even, right, of validator nodes to approve any sort of change to the code. Good luck, especially when you're talking about it somehow benefiting the United States federal government when this is a global decentralized system. I don't think so much that's going to work. I don't think that's really going to fly, but that's not the way that this is going. You're talking about affecting one corridor. So Ripple here, it's their biggest corridor from the United States into Mexico, and you're talking about increasing friction by adding tax potentially. Now, it doesn't mean this is going to happen, but President Donald Trump has stated, yeah. and his rationale is for the wall, which I'm not getting into the wall. But I'm just saying, if you just think from an economics perspective, what that would do. Oh yes, undeniably, you're talking about adding a tremendous amount of friction. Now, the degree to which it's friction, tremendous friction, would vary depending on the increase in terms of taxation. What's the percent? Is it going to be 1%? Is it going to be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10? I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be good. And so then there was this tweet also. Ryan wrote this. So here's another tweet from Ryan. Coding in to take a cut of remittances using XRP would create 0% more friction in the system and would still operate hundreds of times faster and more efficiently than the current system. So I already kind of covered why that doesn't make sense, because you wouldn't be coding anything in an XRP. The global decentralized system, there's no reason that they'd approve that anyway to feed money to the federal government, and that's not what President Trump was proposing, anything specific to XRP. They would be taxing remittance companies. And that's where we go. So whether it's a bank or a remittance company, the tax would be collected through those entities and then fed to the federal government. So I think there's a misunderstanding there of the way that this would be structured here. I think there's one more from Ryan here. Ryan also wrote, with over 10% of remittances to Mexico utilizing XRP already, it's not far-fetched that they would look into a cheaper operating cost to increase the percent they can take while still lowering costs. Yeah, so that's not the way it works. And again, I'm coming at this as from the perspective of an actual business owner. You're able, in terms of the margin you're able to acquire, it's based on what the market will bear, and there is a floor to what it costs to operate a business. And so when you're just assuming, the government can tax more, and the businesses that operate will say, we'll just do with less so that the tax effectively doesn't get passed on to the consumer. Well, no, that's not how that works. There's a floor to what it costs to run a business. Try running a business. You will find this out very quickly. So let me assure you of that. So the answer is no to that one as well. It's fun to think through all this stuff, though. But look, I don't know if this is going to happen. If President Trump says this is something they're looking into, okay, I'll take him at his word, but I don't know that it's ever going to happen. And if it did, to the degree to which it would affect things, it depends on how severe the tax is. I'm just saying, with what Ripple is trying to do in terms of reducing costs for some of the poorest people on the planet and speed things up, all this will do is add friction, unless you are going to argue to me that increasing the cost of remittances, especially for some of the poorest people on the planet, does not add friction in their lives. Good luck on that one. Good luck, because I wouldn't want to try and defend that position. So I'm just saying, it is really fun to think through. And so thank you, Ryan, for sharing your opinions. And if you have a response to any of this, I'd certainly be happy to have a back and forth. But I thought it'd make for a fun video here. So hopefully you guys. Now, I'll wrap up by sharing just a couple other things. I was reading this. It was a blog from worldbank.org. And this write-up was from a guy named Dilip Ratha, who is a lead economist, migration and remittances, and head of Nomad. He acts as a focal point for the World Bank on migration, remittances, and diaspora bonds. He is a coordinator of the G7/G20 Global Remittances Working Group, and he had a TED Talk called The Hidden Force in Global Economics Sending Money Home, which has 1.4 million views. So this guy knows his remittance stuff, and he wrote this piece titled, Why Taxing Remittances is a Bad Idea. And he already hit on some of the stuff. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, I'll just be brief, but he hit on some of the ideas that initially struck me on why I'm skeptical of this being a good thing here, right? And so here's number one, check this out. Since the income of migrants has, in principle, already been taxed in the host country, taxing remittances amounts to double taxation for tax-paying migrants. Since remittances are usually sent to poor families of migrants, the tax would be borne ultimately by them, and therefore it is likely to be highly regressive. And then don't forget, where do the tax dollars go? It's not going to individual states, and the states, generally speaking, are more responsible tax dollars than the federal government. But this would be going to the federal government. Yay, I trust you with my money. Number two, a tax on remittances will raise the cost of remittances in direct contravention to the G20 commitments and the sustainable development goal of reduced remittances and increasing financial inclusion. And three, I'm not going to go through all these, but this is the third one, and then I'll stop here. Poor migrant workers tend to be highly sensitive to the costs of remittances. A tax on remittances will drive these flows to unregulated informal channels. that is likely to reduce the tax revenue, increase the cost of tax administration, and encourage informal channels of money flows, raising security risk. So there you go. I hope I made a compelling case. If you disagree with me, and if you're listening still, that's perfectly fine. We can still be friends, and I would love to hear why you think I'm wrong, because I think back and forth and thinking through things analytically is frankly a lot of fun. That's why I love making videos like this. So just know it's always coming from a good place, and let's have some thoughtful conversation. But I'll wrap up here. I am not a financial advisor. Do not buy or sell anything because of anything that I say or write. That would be a very, very, very bad idea. Until next time, to the moon, Lambo.